Well, it's great to be here tonight. It's such a good turnout for our United Ireland Commission event in Armagh City. This is one of a series of events which have been held across Ireland and outside of Ireland as well. It's an opportunity for people from all backgrounds, all political interests, all parts of our community to come together to discuss what their idea of a new Ireland might look like and assist us in the very necessary planning that there is to be held in terms of constitutional change in this country.
We enjoyed tonight's event. We are thrilled to welcome Declan Kearney MLA here tonight. Declan is the chairperson on the Commission on the Future of Ireland and is the party's national chairperson. I would now like to welcome Declan to the stage to make tonight's opening remarks on behalf of Sinn Féin. Can we please give him a very warm Armagh welcome?
Míle buíochas leatsa Sarah as ocht an fáilte sin agus tachas orm sa bheith liv an seo ag ahar ardwatha an ocht. Corann se glundar macrí scáte comór le seo a ecail. Tá muid ag ddíriúas teachanis cindanna díosparachtaí as suntasaí fud fad na Helen I láthair na huair agus é sé sin an díosbaracht thuchaí na hÉireann. Agus nuair a thosamuid an comisiún seo ghlacamar le cin líntse chun chuir síos meán an comisiún agus chun daoine a bhailú isteach in san córa faoi scáchan comisiún. Agus siad na cin líntse sin na aberleat, hay spéic, have your say. Mar sin dó le linn na hamacht a nocht tá sólagam go mé neart le rá auguse. I hope you'll all hear speak tonight. Agus go muna sibh tarbha as an díosbaracht. Sin ráite. I want to welcome all of you to tonight's conversation about Irish unity and the many opportunities that can open up in a new Ireland. And I want to particularly welcome those who have so graciously given of their time to join us tonight on the panel. This is the 18th public event organised by Sinn Féin's Commission on the Future of Ireland, as Sarah mentioned. And the People's Assemblies and the sectoral meetings that have now taken place right across Ireland have been from Belfast to the Connemara Gaeltacht and from Derry to Waterford. Several thousand people have contributed. There's an online link and hundreds of written contributions have been made about all of these events and the discussions that have taken place to date. Last June, a very successful economic conference was held in Belfast involving Sinn Féin's senior finance spokesperson, Pearse Doherty, Teach Dadala, and also executive ministers, Kiva Archibald, our finance minister, and local MLA, Conor Murphy, MLA, who is also the economy minister and the power sharing executive. And a similar economic event with the same senior panel is scheduled for Canavans in Ballygawley on Friday the 22nd of November from 11 a.m. until 1 p.m. And that event will examine the impact of partition west of the Bann and what Irish unity can do to address those fault lines. In the last 2 weeks, two very successful People's Assemblies have also taken place in the United States. And there will be more events planned across North America in the time ahead. And the diaspora, as all of you who will have loved ones and friends and neighbours who have left this part of the world to live elsewhere, all of you will know that they have a very important role to play in any discussion about the future of our island. The Sinn Féin Commission is making an important contribution to the necessary process of planning and preparing for unity. It was established 2 years ago by Uachtaráin Sinn Féin, Mary Lou MacDonald, to provide an opportunity for citizens to have their say on the future of the island in all of its aspects. And while the party's commission events have been very representative and inclusive, and that has been a hallmark of all of the events that we have organised, they are tapping into a wider discourse. So the level of discussion on constitutional change is quite remarkable right throughout the island at this time. The dial has most definitely shifted on this debate. There's now an unprecedented cross-party political consensus on the need to plan and prepare for constitutional change. And it has become a mainstream topic of conversation among citizens on this island, throughout the 6 counties and the 26 counties, regardless of their background, tradition here in Ireland. Indeed, important sections of the international opinion now recognise that the potential for constitutional change is now written into the political horizon. During his visit to Ireland 4 weeks ago, the South African Deputy President, Paul Mashatile, became the first significant global figure to publicly endorse the achievement of Irish unity. Economists, business organisations and academic researchers are all extensively modelling and mapping the economic opportunities and changes that would derive from a new constitutional settlement on the island. And as the multifaceted nature of the conversation deepens, people are increasingly questioning what Irish unity might actually mean to them in practical terms for their lives in the here and the now and also in the future. So, a recent report, for instance, the General Election Survey of 2024, which looked at recent election results, confirmed that the proportion of people supporting the union with Britain has sharply declined in recent years, below 50% of the population. The numbers positively considering Irish unity has increased by 5 points. And when the statistics for those under the age of 25 are examined, the figures are even more compelling. Those supporting Irish unity are equal, that is 47%, to those in favour of retaining the link with Britain. In addition, there are a greater number of locally elected members of Parliament at Westminster supporting Irish unity rather than supporting the connection with England. In the Assembly election of 2022, Sinn Féin emerged as the largest party in the Assembly, and as you know, Michelle O'Neill became the First Minister for all. But that was a result which the northern state was created to prevent ever happening. And that was why it was so seismic and significant in all of our political and civic lives. Recent successive elections in the north have demonstrated a momentum in the pro-unity vote, by contrast with the pro-union vote. And all of this is evidence of political realignment and demographic change in the north, and which is in turn influencing the debate on Irish unity. Earlier, I touched on the cross-party consensus which has emerged. In July this year, the Joint Oireachtas Committee on the Good Friday Agreement, which has representatives of all of the major parties represented in Leinster House, called on the Irish government to begin planning for Irish unity. And that report said, and I'm quoting, "Preparation for referenda on Irish unification will be an historic task. The committee," that is the Joint Oireachtas Committee, "calls for preparation to begin immediately." Notably, the 3 coalition parties in government in Dublin all have representatives on that committee. Therefore, all of those 3 parties also are signed up to that consensus position. So the debate on constitutional change is now centre stage. And dates for the unity referenda provided for in the Good Friday Agreement, in Sinn Féin's view, should now be set before the end of this decade. That is not to argue, and I'm not trying to argue this evening, that we should be rushing our fences. The pathway to a new Ireland should be incremental and it should be phased. And it needs to be taken forward intelligently and democratically. For our part, Sinn Féin has a clear prospectus on the transition to a new national democratic settlement on our island. And we will set out our approach in the forthcoming Irish general election with practical steps, including, among others, a commitment to establish a reunification unit within the Taoiseach, that is the Taoiseach's department, to appoint a Minister of State with responsibility for reunification. We'll publish a Green Paper on constitutional change within the first 100 days of a new government term, and convene Citizens' Assembly on our constitutional future. Those are some of the practical steps that we will set out. But the point really, friends, is that a new All-Ireland framework of governance must be carefully planned and resourced. At its core, the partition of our country institutionalised the denial of the Irish people's right to self-determination. And the United Nations Charter of 1945, which you will have heard much talk about, sadly, in the course of recent months, directly as a result of the genocidal war being carried out in Gaza, it enshrines the right of self-determination within international law. And self-determination is also an integral component of the Good Friday Agreement itself. In the absence of a pathway to national unity, the North is at risk of being left behind outside of the European Union and cast to the periphery of the rest of the island as a result of Brexit's legacy. The people of the North continue to be denied rights across a range of priorities, from access to legacy justice, to proper investment in public services, and access to our own fiscal levers. But Irish unity, Acharja, opens up a gateway to change all of that. Of course, it cannot be a crude exercise of simply stitching on the north to the south and returning to business as usual, of failed states becoming one failed state, failing all of us. It has to be better than that. It has to be a new Ireland. That's what we all deserve. All of you, your friends, your family, and our next generations. An Ireland in which equality and rights are guaranteed, culture is respected, and the diversity of all of our identities and our ethnic identities are absolutely entrenched and included. Irish unity has become the defining issue for our generation. And we can all, and I don't say this as some kind of a rhetorical flourish, we can all become the authors of a new future. One that is positive, progressive, inclusive, anti-sectarian, and absolutely multicultural. That type of ambition can be realised if we work and plan together. So, Acharja, Mar Uckle Skur, you'll be glad to hear, this evening's conversation is an opportunity to have your say. Hey, your spake, upper yat, ganabroi to an major ta inchin ugat, on what the most important and relevant factors are which will shape the future of Ireland in your and your family and your friends' interests. So I do hope that you enjoy this evening's discussion, and I'm delighted once again to welcome and express the party's appreciation for the attendance of all of our guests this evening. Gura maigas.
Good evening, everybody. As Sarah outlined, my name's Dara Magan. I'm a human rights lawyer. Traditionally start all of these meetings with a forewarning and an apology for my Newry accent, but if you all can't understand me, I really don't have any hope. This is an independent panel, and on behalf of all the panellists, I should say, they're all here in their independent capacity, and that whilst Sinn Féin has arranged the event, they will not be participating in the discussion. There will be a report prepared following the note takers, very diligent notes, I'm sure, at the end of the meeting. To my left, Sinead Hughes. Sinead is an expert in all things health. She's been in the health service for nearly 33 years, is a huge advocate for equality and social justice. She's worked with the traveller community in many capacities for over 7 years, and she believes fully in the need for listening and offering a safe environment to help bridge any divides in honouring the traditions, beliefs and values of others. And I think with that, we could give Sinead a warm welcome, please. Secondly, is Dr. Anne Devlin, who is a research officer in the Economic Analysis Division, is an expert in all things economics, and as you'll see from her extensive CV, has been involved in very high levels in respect of the disability in the North and whether there is a relationship with the Troubles, which is, I'm sure you'll all agree, a particularly important issue when we come on to deal with the economy. She is a visiting researcher at Queen's Business School and is a member of the steering group of the All-Ireland Social Security Network. So with that, if we could just give Dr. Anne Devlin a warm welcome, please. And finally, the last panellist, Ian Marshall, he needs no introduction, in my view. He's one of probably the most unique characters for his unrivaled background. Certainly in my experience, I don't think I've ever met anybody who holds an OBE and who sat as a senator, and for that, I commend him. He is Head of Business Development and Policy in the Centre of Advanced Sustainable Energy. He is an expert in all things agricultural, and given where we are, I think that in particular is an important topic we hope to cover tonight. He has been a former president of the Ulster Farmers Union and a member of the Agri-Food Strategy Board, and he continues the most important job of all, to manage in partnership with his son, the family farm. And with that, could we give Ian, please, a very warm welcome. So, what I'm hoping to do, to give everybody an idea of how we're going to deal with format, we're going to deal with the benefits at the start, then we're going to move to deal with rights, and then we're going to try and draw upon each of the speakers' expertise. So we'll then turn to economy, we'll turn to agriculture, and we'll turn to healthcare, to give everybody a chance to feed in where they wish to feed in. So hopefully that gives everybody the platform at different times to address the different speakers, if they wish, on different questions. And if we can, just to try and speed things up, if you wish to ask a question, or like I say, make a comment, give feedback, if you can raise your hand, we can get one of the microphones to you. Okay, with that, we'll maybe start with the most obvious question of all. And maybe, Ian, if you could kick us off. How could Irish unity benefit the people of Armagh?
Thanks for the invitation, and maybe I'm out of my depth here with this panel tonight. But so how would Irish unity benefit the people of Armagh? As you would understand, and as you probably know, I come from a community that many people probably would struggle with that question. And when we have this conversation about the opportunities with unity, I think we need to just take one step back for a moment and recognise and acknowledge that for everyone in the room tonight here who would be strongly supportive of it, there's probably another room we could fill of people who have a different opinion. So bearing that in mind, I think there are opportunities for Irish unity, but as Declan rightly said, there's a conversation has to happen. There's a process of a journey, as Darren referred to, a road that we're on, that there'll be lots of conversations. I work my daily life in a university, and every time we do any piece of work in a university, it must be underpinned with evidence and data. So you can have all your opinions you want, but nobody listens to you unless you can underpin that with evidence and data. So when we look at the unity question, and I think something that goes back, and Dara, somebody's formerly been in the Iraq to stop me, because that'll be your problem talking to lots. When you look at the question about unity, I think we need to actually understand. I went to a school across the other side of the mall, and my history lessons involved everything but Irish history. When I look at Michael D. Higgins' proposed visit to Armagh a couple of years ago, that didn't happen. And I was interviewed by the Irish Times on this about the visit and why it didn't happen. And something that I made a point to stand by this to this day is that when we look at the partition question, people from Protestant Unionist communities never ever have truly understood the hurt or the division or the pain that people felt when the island was partitioned. That's just unfortunately a fact, and there's a job of work to do to get people to understand that feeling of separation and division. On the flip side of that is, and I saw this in the Oireachtas, I saw it in Dublin, that lots of people in nationalist and Republican communities have never actually understood the feeling of belonging that unionist, loyalist communities have to the UK, to the Crown, the monarchy, and all of the things that are represent Britishness. So when we have a conversation about unity, I think it's important that we start off recognising that not everybody shares the same position. We've come from a very divided past, but I look around this room tonight and I see the amount of young people here. And when I look at the young people and when I look at my children who are 25, 26 and 28, they see life completely differently to we see life. There's a bias that I bring to a conversation because of my history, and I've no doubt the other panel members, because we're products of our past and we're products of our upbringings. That being said, there is a conversation to be had. I think the problem for me has been that for many people who want to engage in a conversation, they can't feel comfortable to join that conversation. And what I would suggest is that if we have a conversation, a constructive, respectful conversation about unity, I think it's actually much better to parcel that conversation up as a constructive, opportunistic conversation. Because if you're selling me a new car, I'd want something that was faster, shinier, more fuel efficient, more luxurious. And at the minute, when we look south of the border, I don't see an economy that's doing that, and the experts are on the panel. So I look at an economy with a 24.5 billion surplus at the moment. And if you take away the corporate tax dividends and you take away the Apple windfall, you're actually, I think it's a 6.3 billion in deficit. I see young people that are leaving the island. I have a brother in Australia. There's lots of young Irish people going out to Australia to find jobs. There's a housing crisis. There are issues. So I think the conversation about unity is one that is to be had. I think it needs to happen in parallel with, because always when you're doing work in universities, you have a control. So you say, well, if we change this, what do we compare it to? Because you can't compare it in splendid isolation. So I think there is a positive conversation to have about the opportunities that unity present and the status quo, as we talk about, and compare and contrast, and where the conversation I think needs to go is it needs to be very honest and open and transparent to say, let's look at it, because we have a framework that there'll be a democratic decision made on the constitutional question. And I think if we present the evidence and let people have the conversations and the discussions and take away the stigma of a conversation about unity and take away the stigma of conversations about the status quo, I think if we compare and contrast and give people all the facts and information, there's certainly an opportunity. And I think if we get it right, then unity is a fantastic opportunity. If however the unity question and constitutional change was wrong, and it wasn't, you're never going to have it supported by everyone, but remember, I was nervous that the question I asked that I haven't got an answer for yet is if we have a border poll, if we have the referendum, irrespective of what the outcome is of that, what do we do with the losing side the next day? And that for me is the thing that makes me really nervous, because when I look around the room, I look at the young people, I look at my kids, and I look at the leaps and bounds we have made in this wee place. Fantastic opportunity for us all. I spent a few years in Dublin, Leinster House uniting people, and I still believe we unite people first, and then we'll have a mature conversation.
I don't know what I'm supposed to say after all that. I suppose I thought it was quite interesting you mentioned your background and the stigma around the conversation. When you're called Anne Devlin, people make a lot of assumptions about how you think and where you come from. My mummy and daddy are from a mixed marriage, which obviously isn't a big deal. Lots of people are. But unlike other people, we were brought up also mixed. Most people, they sort of choose one and they go with that. Whereas we were brought up maybe at a band parade on Saturday and in Clonus on Sunday watching Tyrone. And I've never yet come across anybody who had the busy childhood. If there was anything going, mummy or daddy, we went to. I know when we would have this conversation in the house, I have two sisters. Everybody has an entirely different opinion on it. And now you maybe end up with a door getting slammed or something by the end of it, but it's definitely a conversation that's happening in our house. Now, in saying that, it's maybe not happening with family outside of it. And I think when you come from a mixed household like that, there's some things you talk about at certain times when people's there, and some things you just maybe leave till they're away home. But I think it's just very interesting to think about that conversation. And we have a thing in Northern Ireland about talking about things as being contentious. When I actually Googled contentious one time to make sure I knew the definition of it, because I started to think I'm getting a bit mixed up. when some people don't like something, we call it contentious. But if it's something that we're all pretty sure is true or is factually correct, that's not really contentious, as the word is meant to be. I suppose in terms of the benefits of unity, Declan mentioned economists and doing this modelling and looking at how it should look. It's actually very, very difficult talking about the benefits of unity or how that might look like in terms of economics without knowing what this United Ireland, New Ireland, or whatever you want to call it, is going to be. I think we all know at this stage it's quite different from just subsuming the 6 counties into the 26 and going on as things are. There's obviously a lot of change needed. A lot of the time when I talk at events about the economy in the north, I honestly coming away a bit depressed and feeling really very cynical about it all. But as Ian mentioned, the south is not some sort of utopia. There's maybe less potholes, but there's definitely still quite a few problems in it. And it's about really looking at how we can get that benefit for everybody. And I think probably we'll talk more about health and education as the night goes on. In terms of some of the big problems, I think we see that one size fits all. We're just going along with what comes out of London and what comes out of the UK as a whole. And that just is not working for the North. We're not the same as London. We're not the same as the North East. We have some similar problems, but the solutions that are needed for this place aren't the same. A lot of the time we follow England and what they're doing in terms of policy. And actually, we did a big project a couple of years ago in education. And I spoke to a woman from the South and she says, when we're looking at policy or making suggestions for policy, we look to Norway and Canada and Australia. She says in the north, they're just looking to see what England does and then they're following along with that. If they're feeling a bit more inventive, we maybe look to Scotland to see what's happening as sort of a best case. But, there's room here for being more innovative when we can. Again, in terms of them benefits, you mentioned the financial situation in Ireland, Ian. I think that's the big one. Yes, the corporation tax, we hear that all the time, or about the GDP isn't really the GDP. But at the end of the day, the surplus is there at the minute. Whether it could disappear is a whole other story, but it is there at the minute. And when you look at the financial situation in the north, in terms of what's coming from the UK, it's just entirely opposite. And we see our departments now, they're fighting fires. We do not have the money in economy, but in education and health that we really need to see in terms of the services and getting what we need for the people in the north. I wrote down about 1 million things in terms of benefits, but I think we'll probably come back to some of it as we move through some of the more specific things. But as I said, it's very difficult to talk about the benefits to Armagh or to the north more broadly without really knowing what this United Ireland or New Ireland is going to look like.
Thank you, folks. I am definitely not a healthcare professional and I don't feel an expert in any way, but I do have experience working in the health service for quite a long time, and I've worked with quite vulnerable groups and vulnerable communities that feel that they haven't got their say. And what Declan was talking about, having your say, is really, I'm very passionate about that coming from where I work, because I want to involve people in everything that we do. And I suppose when we talk about Irish unity, we need everybody to have their say. We need to have those people that feel that their voices aren't heard. That could be people with a disability. It could be people that actually don't want to have the conversations because, there is a stigma about having conversations about what an All-Ireland would look like. I'm just being very honest, and I'm coming from probably, I'm very proud to say, a Republican family. I am only able to talk about Irish unification in groups and with friends, I suppose, this last 3 to 4 years. And that's not to say I'm ashamed of talking about an All-Ireland and what that would look like for me and for my family. But I think what we need to do is we need to look at what, I suppose, unites us more than what divides us. I think we need to listen to people, and we need to actually create environments to actually get people to come and give us feedback. This forum could be very daunting for the majority of people to come, particularly probably from the unionist side. So I would welcome if forums like this would take these forums to communities, to community halls, to church halls, and actually let people have their say in a kind of more meaningful way. In terms of the benefits, I have a list of benefits as well, the length of your arm, but I suppose I know, and you all know, living in Armagh and coming from a border county, the disadvantage that we are, particularly within health services. I know at the minute I'm working in kind of the South Armagh area, and the workforce in particular, we can't get the workforce because people are going over the border because I suppose pay and whatever is better. I know Anne talked about how we look and how the British government, I suppose the UK government, we're just a wee small fraction, a wee small percentage. I think the benefits for people in Armagh, if we were in a united Ireland, would be that we would be a quarter of the say in that government. We're 25% of the island of Ireland. So, I just think there's hope there. I think, I suppose I see the benefit of hope, but also, that we need to sort of take people with us, with their own sort of way, and take them, because everybody learns and everybody transitions at their own capacity. So, we have to be very mindful of that there. And, everybody has their own perspective and everybody has their own story. But the most important thing is that we need to listen to those stories.
I think we'll all agree there's been a consistent theme through all of the contributions. This is about bringing people with us. This is about inclusivity. It's not about excluding people. It's about bringing people in. It's about bringing people into the conversations. And I certainly, from my own background, I'm very lucky. I see it. I get to represent people from Republican, nationalist to unionist to loyalist perspectives. And it's an incredible opportunity because you get to speak to people from all walks of life. You get to see all different types of perspectives. And the one thing that I've taken great heart in the last number of years is that I think we're now moving away from this style approach, this symbolism. We're now moving to a debate that I see is becoming substance over symbolism. And I think that takes us to this question, and again, effectively hit the nail on the head. We're entering the territory, in my view, of union versus unification. Which is better? And why is it better? What are the benefits? And for me, central to that leads me on to the next question, which is about rights. Because what we've seen from Brexit in particular is that people will, when they're called upon, will vote for what is better for them and where are the greater rights protections. And it is fundamental, in my view, and centre to the questions that we're going to talk about. And I think when we look at this question about what does a new Ireland look like, what does it have, what are the benefits, it's hard to escape the economical benefits, and certainly it's hard to escape the rights benefits. So in the next question, I think we should be looking to, in a new constitution, how can we protect people's rights, identities, culture, beliefs? How can we do that? I'm not sure, Anne, if you want to kick us off.
I have lots of opinions, Dara. I actually find the cultural conversation that we have quite interesting. And I'm not sure the people we see on the news when there's debates or discussions around cultural identity, particularly amongst the Protestant community. And I know we talk about Protestant communities and PUL. We all know what we mean. It's not necessarily the best way of doing it. But when we see people on the TV, I'm not sure that's representative, as somebody who went to a Protestant grammar school, representative of the whole Protestant people. And I was at an event one time with somebody who had worked with the Bands Forum or something, and he was telling me they had a great programme going into Catholic schools and teaching them the flute. And I said, that's brilliant, and they really enjoyed it, which I didn't find surprising in the slightest. But I said to him, if you are trying to promote your culture, I went to a Protestant grammar school, and there is no way in hell they would have let you in to teach flute in that school. Not a chance. There's a huge difference in terms of British cultural identity that I'm not sure we always hear about. So in terms of safeguarding these things, again, it's, do we know everything we need to know about it, or what the whole community wants it to look like, not just the people that we necessarily see in the news or see on Twitter. And I just, from my background, as I said, I went to the odd band parade if I thought there might be crack at it. But most people in my school wouldn't have went to one. Not a chance. Come the 12th, they were in Donegal in their holiday homes. And I just think when we talk about it, I think we're sort of missing a subset of that community. And if you're not getting the full picture, I'm not sure, who are you safeguarding cultural identity or certain aspects of that for? And I always, maybe Ian, you'll agree or disagree with me in your opinion, but definitely there's a very much, I suppose, a sort of social class issue in terms of that British identity and what that looks like, even in terms of sort of maybe bands versus certain lodges and things like that. But I think there's more to be done there in terms of that discussion. Like, we're definitely missing parts of it.
I think it's interesting because I think the most important thing is here when we look about protecting people's rights. We've moved into this phase now where we put people in pigeonholes and we identify a uniform and we dehumanise them. And it doesn't matter what the conversation is, it's much too easy. And these things have been problematic because we dehumanise people. We forget that behind every politician, somebody in public life, that there's a father, there's a son, there's a brother, there's somebody who hurts and feels pain the same as everybody else. So it's much too easy for us to do that. And then that sets us the platform where we can dehumanize people because they look differently to us or because they talk differently to us. And it's really interesting because when you talk about protection of rights, it's really funny for me that in the Seanad, that the interesting thing was that when I sat there as a Protestant Presbyterian from South Armagh in the Seanad, that didn't actually matter because it was a Nordy from the Black North. And if I sat beside a Sinn Féin Republican from West Belfast, we were both Nordies from the Black North and didn't matter. So it was quite funny. But when you talk about protecting people's rights, it's about understanding people. It's about knowing more about them and just not taking the sound bites you get. And it was really interesting because there was, when I was in Dublin, there was a couple of things I'll just share with you. There was the last sitting day in 2019 in the Seanad was the 13th of July. Not an insignificant date for some loyalists and unionists in Armagh. And I was coming back up the road and my phone rang and it was drive time. It was Ivan Yates was doing a programme. And the Irish Times had carried a photograph that morning about there was half a dozen young lads in Derry burning pallets on the Dublin road. And the Dublin press had it that it was complete anarchy in the north, that the province was on fire, and this was back to the old days. So I was asked would I do an interview with Ivan Yates, and he came on and he said, so Senator, what's it like? And I says, Ivan, I'm driving north, I've pulled in here. He says, it's a lovely sunny day, birds are singing, sun's out. He says, there's trouble. I says, there's trouble in Roden Street in Belfast, there's a few lads burning pallets in Derry, but other than that, what about the parades? Is there much violence? I says, Ivan, most people are at those parades today and they're probably out eating ice cream and fish and chips, meeting their neighbours that they never see all year. And I says, there's no trouble at that. Now, that's not the story that Ivan wanted. But then he went on to unionism and loyalism. And unfortunately, the media's perception, and they look at unionism and loyalism through the lens of some big egos in unionist politics, and some very high-profile people who are very outspoken, who are sectarian, who are bigoted, who certainly aren't representative of the community I come from. And it was brought home to me, Sarah Byrne did a programme one night on RTE when I was there, and she had Leo Varadkar in the panel, she had a number of different people in politics and public life, but she also had the rugby player Andrew Trimble down. And Andrew Trimble was interviewed and he came on and he said about how he grew up in a middle-class Protestant background, how he had Protestant and Catholic friends, how he dated Catholic girls, and all these things about his job, about his rugby. And I went in Leinster House the next morning and everybody was saying, oh my goodness, did you see Andrew Trimble? Wasn't that brilliant? Wasn't that brilliant to hear that? And I said, but guys, Andrew Trimble's a metaphor for the people I work with. He's a metaphor for my family. He's a metaphor for the people I play football with. He's a metaphor for the people I engage with. But this notion that loyalism and unionism is represented through bowler hats and collarettes and parades and violence. And I'll leave you with one of the most surreal moments I ever had in the last 5 years was standing on Dame Street in Dublin, going on a 1916 Easter Rising walking tour, 4 of us. The man taking us was a fervent, hardline Irish Republican, and the 3 gentlemen with me were former members of the UVF, the UDA, and the Red Hand Commandos. And I'll tell you something for nothing, the level of questioning and the intelligence of the questioning was frightening, and the respect was frightening. But if you told me that those gentlemen were going to be there and would be comfortable there, you probably wouldn't believe me as telling you the truth. But that's why respect for culture and identity has to be about understanding people. And that goes both ways. For those men to talk to that Irish Republican to understand what motivated him and the things that made him tick is equally as important.
Yeah, and Ian, I had just wrote respect when you know, because I think that's the key to this question in terms of people's rights and cultural identities. And that's something that we all, you know, in every walk of life, we should respect everybody's cultural identity and absolutely safeguard that in a new constitution. I suppose I'm going back to that saying that there's more unites us than divides us. And I really do believe in that. And I think we should celebrate all our similarities and our differences and use that, I suppose, as a vehicle to drive change. But the crucial thing with rights and cultural identity is people. So people are the drivers of change. And I'm going back to then to, you know, we need to listen to people. We need to listen to those stories from all across this province and across the border as well. And if we don't understand people, you know, we'll never get over this. I suppose there's a lot of myths, and we want to dispel a lot of the myths about people and their identity and what would happen if there's a united Ireland. Would they still have their cultural identity? And we need to safeguard that. And I just go back to it's really not rocket science either. You know, it's very, very simple. We need to get people into the room. We need to give them a safe space to talk. We need to respect them. And particularly those people that don't have a voice, those vulnerable groups that feel they're not being heard or they feel that they can't be seen or heard. And that's pivotal to any change. But at the end of the day, you know, we can have policies, we can have data sets, but it's the people that drive change. And I think that's what will safeguard, I suppose, people's cultural identity and rights if there was a new constitution.
I think I agree fully. The whole question about is there is more, well, the answer is there is more unites than divides us. And one thing that I always think about when this topic's discussed, from my own experience, I remember when I first started in Belfast and didn't know anybody in the legal profession, I remember coming across this wee stocky guy who was born in Sandy Row, who had about as much in common with me as somebody from Timbuktu, to be frank. And we just couldn't understand each other. And I always remember in one case he said to me, "Are you in that case as well?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Am I the only Protestant not in that case?" I said, "Well, look, I don't think it's that." And we built up this strange bond, and we actually worked out very quickly. It was because we both had the same disrespect for authority. And his way of introducing me was, do you play football? Do you want to come and play 5-a-side on a Monday night? I said, I absolutely do. And first thing I noted, turning up the Avenel soccer club was the Union Jacks on the way in, you know, God save the UVF. And the only thing I did is I didn't get the memo that everybody else was wearing a Northern Ireland soccer jersey. And fast forward 5 years, I then go to Dublin and spend a year in Dublin. And it was an experience of a lifetime. And the one thing I realised very quickly is I have much more in common with the lads in Avenel than I do with the lawyers in Dublin, because they're all double-barreled names and they're all from D4. And they look at me as if I'm the lowest of the low. So I fully agree. I think there's a whole big issue about identity, and it's about we have more in common than we actually think. And I think it goes back to my earlier point, which I think we all agree on when we talked about earlier. People will go with what is better for them. People will always go with what's better for them. And I think one of the most important questions in this debate is the next one, and that is, how can Irish unity benefit the economy? Why would it be better for the economy? Anne, over to you.
You're making me work for it tonight. I honestly don't know where to start. When I was doing my PhD, I remember sitting down one day with my supervisors, and as Dara said, my thesis looked at disability rates in the north and how that related back to the conflict, why they were higher than England, had anything to do with the Troubles and things like that. So they sat me down one day and said, basically, how are you going to have a career? Because you're not going to have a career in academia just talking about Northern Ireland, nobody cares. And then we have seen now things like this, following Brexit, the fallout of it, that increased discussion about the constitutional arrangements on this island. I have a whole career made out of talking about Northern Ireland and the northern economy and north-south issues. I work on a lot of the projects now. The Department of Taoiseach Shared Island Unit funds the Institute. And a lot of that work we're doing, honestly, is not overly complicated. To me, it's work that should have been done 30 years ago because we live in a wee small island. It just never was because that was contentious. So, you know, we work on a whole range of different things now. Education's probably one of the big ones. We had a report come out a couple of years ago, basically just comparing the education and training systems north and south. And obviously, again, there's problems in the south, and people in the south had lots of problems with the education system that they were working within, but just stark differences. And you know, when I was going all through school and even through uni, you heard about that world-class education system we have in Northern Ireland. And really, when you get down, I have no idea who started it, but when you get down into the data, it really isn't the case at all. And you nearly think, you feel bad saying it, like I came through that education system, so it's not a case of wanting to be bashing everything in Northern Ireland all the time. It just, as Ian said, it's the facts of the matter, and we went through, you know, various data sources and things. Some of the main problems, academic selection, you know, we're at a stage now, parents don't want it, children don't want it, teachers don't want it. The Commissioner for Young People and Children has nothing but quite strong negative things to say about it, yet it's still here. Early school leaving, the rates of early school leaving are about 2 to 3 times as high in the north compared to the south, depending on what measure you use. So people who are sort of 16 to 20 leaving school with more than sort of level 2 qualifications. The further education system, so we have schools, we've got rid of BTECs now, but we had schools doing BTECs, colleges doing A-levels, colleges doing uni, you know, first step uni courses, and unis, you know, they're all competing with each other rather than having very streamlined sort of pathways for young people. Everybody really was a bit confused, whereas in the south, that's one thing they've been really working on sort of the last 5 years is getting a clear pathway through for young people. And when you see the proportion who are staying on in education in the south to 18, it's basically everybody, bar, you know, a couple of people who really don't want to be there or for whatever reasons. And then the numbers going on to further or higher education again is, you know, it's really, really big. And when we tracked sort of educational outcomes back till, I think, 2005, so, you know, less than 20 years ago, not a big, massive period of time, our educational attainment levels were nearly identical with the south. And over that, you know, their people with low levels of education has just tailed off completely with the work they've been doing to promote people staying in education and the importance of education and things. And Northern Ireland has basically not changed at all in 2 decades. You know, and that's not what you want to see. We should be improving across the board in everything, given the technological change and the things just we're seeing within the economy. One big thing this year that came up, the more I thought about it after, it just blew my mind completely. I've been doing a couple of projects this year on the all-island labour market. I suppose in part stems from the changes to remote working and things and the tax arrangements, but also I don't know how many people here read the Safeguarding the Union document earlier in the year, where they talked about the all-island economy being a political concept. So we've been doing a lot more work in that area. And we were speaking to businesses up in Derry who basically said because of the border, they were unable to invest in the company. So companies that were maybe headquartered in London or America, when they went looking for money, they were just saying, but where are you going to get workers from? And you mentioned it as a problem in healthcare. It's a problem across the board for businesses, and particularly those closer to the border, whose sort of, I suppose, radius around them where they would be looking for workers cuts into the Republic. So that's a big problem as well. Like, with the government always talking about investment, productivity, we hear it all the time, getting private investment in, we rely on the public sector in Northern Ireland, but yet at the same time you have firms who are unable to invest for reasons that really shouldn't be too hard to overcome. Another area we work on is economic inactivity. So I mentioned disability, but we look at economic inactivity more broadly. And when you look at economic inactivity, north and south, we actually have nearly identical rates of inactivity, which is interesting, I suppose, given the different economies we have. But when you look within that, there's huge differences. You know, that inactivity is driven by women who are temporarily leaving the labour force when they're having children and things due to availability and affordability of childcare. But up here, it's that real long-term inactivity. And that all stems back from the social security system. So that there's a real area for change needed there. You know, the social security system's just so inflexible that people, if they become inactive, even if they become able to work, you know, if their situation changes, they don't want to know, because it took them so long to get their social security or benefits that they were entitled to in place, you know, maybe had to reach out to their local politician or advisors or whatever, that they just don't want to change anything. So that's keeping people out of the labour force at a time when we're talking about these really tight labour markets. And that's completely different to what we see in the south, and that social security is an area where there's quite a lot of difference, where should there be United Ireland, we'd see a lot of economic benefit to the north. And then just one last thing. So I'm trying to keep it to sort of, I suppose, we've heard enough stories about me going to band parades and Clonus. So to the research we're doing, and you'll maybe talk more about it, but in terms of COVID, so we were looking at COVID rates, and I mapped them, you know, at quite a small area level, and just round the border, they're just so much higher, and there's no real reason for it. You know, COVID wasn't jumping faster if you were 10 miles to the border. So, and we actually see that north and south, which really points to that need for more cross-border cooperation. And I think health's probably a good example of it, but it's across the board. You know, it just would make things a lot simpler for a lot of people. But in terms of the economics is just huge. Like lots of people ask me what economics is. Economics is everything, and it touches on everything. So talking about how the economics would benefit from Irish unity is very difficult, but that's what we work on. And to me, education is one area where we're really starting to lag behind as a so-called developed economy. And when you're seeing your neighbours do things well, you know, we should really be looking at and learning from things like that.
Looks like it's over to you, Ian. The one issue, I think, following from the economy, which I think is always very important, and particularly again when we go to Brexit, we see agriculture and farming was a massive issue, which seen a huge shift, I think, if it's fair to say, within particular the unionist community. So can you tell us what your views are on where we are, where agriculture and farming is very important as well. So what would your view be on how agriculture and farming can be affected, how it can be improved, and what benefits are offered for the people of Armagh in respect of unification?
Yeah, thanks. I suppose I spoke at a conference last Thursday in Titanic down in Belfast, and I wanted to prove a point about the importance of agriculture. So I started by saying, would everybody put their hands up in the room, and then asked, everybody as a farmer, put your hand down. Everybody whose mother and father are a farmer, put your hands down. Everybody whose grandparents or uncles or aunts. And by the sixth question, there was no hands left in the room. The point being that we're all fairly close to agriculture. We're only one generation removed from the land, and we're probably much closer here. And I know, speaking to a man who used to run a business in this town, who's passed away now, that he never needed to open a paper to know whether agriculture was doing well in Armagh or doing badly, because the shop told him without asking anybody how well they were doing. Because the beauty about agricultural revenues generated is that if it's made locally, it's usually spent locally, and it's in the local economy that's spent. But if we look at the unity question, remember, we fundamentally have an all-island agricultural economy. Our red meat industry is owned by about 7 companies that are all-island companies. Our dairy companies, there's the flow of milk that goes north-south and product that comes south-north. That's already happening. So we have a completely integrated all-island economy in agriculture. We look at biosecurity, plant health and animal health. That is an all-island structure. That's how that operates. So for agriculture, this isn't that much of a stretch of the imagination. It's not hard to comprehend what that would look like. For other parts of business and industry, it's interesting. My work in Queen's looks at bioeconomy and green energy and renewables, and it's interesting because my concern at the moment is there's actually 2 conversations going on here. Despite having a single electricity market for the island, we're talking about biomethane opportunities, we're talking about all these different renewable technologies separately in 2 separate conversations, and that for me isn't a healthy thing to be doing. But if we look at the university work again, it's about evidence and data, and sometimes, you know, when you look at it, the theory would tell you that something's good, but you're not sure until you prove that. And I'll give you an example. There was a certain individual put £350 million a week on a red bus and drove it round and round for a few months. Now, when Brexit happened, we didn't get 350 million a week because it was just a theory that we would get it, or a bit of misrepresentation. I think when we look at the opportunities under unity and look at the constitutional change, we need to look at and acknowledge the reality. And you know, you made reference to it. On, you know, we have two health systems that fundamentally are both broken. And I always go back to a bit of evidence given one of the executive committees at the Brexit conversations. And there was an executive came in from one of the big haulage companies in Northern Ireland, and they asked him about, you know, the opportunities for Brexit and this dual market access. And I'll never forget him, because he said, well, you know, dual market access sounds really good. It sounds like we're going to get jam on both sides of our bread. But he says, I think that's maybe just what you call a sticky mess. And hence, we've got a sticky mess. But when we accept that the theory tells us that if you take two healthcare systems and combine them, if you get it right, there are opportunities. But that doesn't get over the fact if they're both broken, there has to be fundamental changes in it. When we look at education, and it's impressive south of the border. It really is impressive. They're doing phenomenal work. The number of third-level graduates they're churning out, the amount of smart young men and women in IT, in the pharma industry, in cybersecurity, it's phenomenal. But I was at a meeting last week in the university, and there was a 77-year-old lady from Colorado was speaking. And she said at that meeting, she says, be very careful, because a company beside us in Colorado have just laid off 1,000 programmers because AI is doing computing programming now. You're going to need young men and women who fix things and build things and make things better. And maybe we need to learn from that, because it's not always about IT, but we could do that better. We already have big collaboration projects across the island. Queen's, I work with the University of Galway, I work with UCD and Trinity. So the universities are working together. Dundalk Institute, the technological institutes south of the border are phenomenal. What they're doing is mind-blowing, and we could do more of that. But I think sometimes we're also a bit hard on ourselves, because we churn out lots of good graduates. Unfortunately, our best export in the north is people, and we've churned out good people. We've exported them all over the world. And I actually always assumed that we're churning out far more than the south, but at the minute we're not. I went to school in a school system where most of the people went to English, Scottish or Welsh universities. And the figure I heard the other day, which was surprising, that we put up about 6% of our students go to English, Scottish or Welsh universities. But the really frightening thing for me was that in the Republic, about 5% of their kids are going to English, Scottish and Welsh universities. So, you know, now sometimes that's presented in Northern Ireland as a brain drain and a failure of Northern Ireland. I actually think that's unfair, because I think lots of us sent our kids to universities for life experience, to go away, to learn, to meet different people, and then hopefully to come back. And the interesting thing about Northern Ireland, 26 years after the Good Friday Agreement, is that we're seeing those kids come back, because they can buy houses, they can start a family. It's a good, safe place to bring up your family. So there are opportunities, and I'm going to say something now that I hope isn't contentious. I know it's not contentious. Whether you're a Republican or a loyalist, if you want to fast-track Irish unity, or if you want to protect the Union, Northern Ireland has to be successful, prosperous and vibrant. So what does that tell you? That tells us that if you're a Republican or a loyalist, we need to get our shoulder to the wheel and work together to make this place work. Because there will be a question to be answered that is a democratic question, and at some point will be asked it. And actually what I think the opportunity arises, and this is the contentious bit, I actually think for anybody who's a Republican, you pursue Irish unity by driving north, south, east, west economy, because that is a comfortable space for everybody.
Thanks, Ian. I think we have a couple of contributions from the floor, so maybe we'll start with this gentleman on the third row. Can we get him a microphone, if possible? This guy. Oh, sorry.
Well, my question's for Sinead. So I'm also in the healthcare profession, and I was just wondering, so at the moment you've already got sort of different all-island health projects going on. You know, you've got the cross-border health initiative being done with Kingsbridge Hospital. You've got different sports injuries clinics in south of Ireland that are helping people in the north. I was just wondering what you think the benefits of an all-island health system would be at the moment, and how it's already successful.
Yeah, there's quite a number of cross-border projects, and I've been very privileged and lucky to be involved in some of them. Now, saying that has gone back quite a while, but I was involved with the All-Ireland Health Study, and I was also involved in some of the COT projects, the Cooperation and Working Together projects. I think it works. You can imagine if you pool your resources, you know, two resources pooled together. Pooled resources are always better than separate resources. So you can imagine if we consumed on our resources and developed services in an all-Ireland healthcare system. And I know I talked about dispelling myths, but I think there is a myth around, you know, if there is an all-Ireland, so you have to pay for everything down south, you know, we couldn't afford that. And that goes across the board for all communities in the north of Ireland. So I suppose the Sláinte Care programme has really sort of dispelled all those myths. It's an integrated care model. It's based on the NHS trust model of delivering healthcare at the point of delivery. So I think we have the back broke in terms of the healthcare aspect of it, if it's in all Ireland, and also the introduction and the launch of Sinn Féin's health prescription. I think I haven't got reading it today, but I just saw it and was reading about that. So I think there's really good areas of good practice in terms of healthcare, and I think we just need to continue that, because at the minute, you know, healthcare is really stretched here in the north of Ireland. I'm very proud to be working in the health service. I'm very proud of the colleagues and the services that we deliver, but we're really delivering them at a stretched model. We don't have the investment that we need, and ultimately it's you and it's the people and the potential users of our services that it's impacting on really badly. And particularly we're going back to those border counties as well. You see with Daisy Hill, the services there that it has an impact on. So yeah, and we've got the cross-border cancer project as well. And I suppose health is everybody's business as well. It's not just the health department in either side of the island. You know, and every single one of us here and every single person that works in health service, and I can vouch for all my colleagues, we want to see the full potential for people's health and well-being. And we can do that if we join together and pool our resources. And again, we're going back to involving people in the design and delivery and shaping of any of that service or what that looks like. But the Sláinte Care, when I read into it and looked at it, and they have sort of progressed on some of their key actions, it's delivering, I suppose, what we would ultimately want as an all-Ireland healthcare model. That's my personal opinion. Obviously, that's not the health service opinion. Could be getting my P45 if we're going to work tomorrow. But I just think there's opportunities there, and we have to grasp those opportunities. And again, you know, there's really good practice and good areas of good practice models. And I suppose when you look, and somebody mentioned, I think it was Declan, about the South African delegate that was over there, you know, we have to look at how they've came through conflict and how they've you know, joined together, and I suppose I see people that I've worked with in health service and working with the travellers in particular, you know, really marginalised communities. And South Africa used that sun coffee bird symbol, you know, that this is the bird that sort of walks forward but its head's back, and it's got an egg in its back, you know, so we can go forward but we can still respect our past, and I think that's really important. But there's lots of learning in healthcare, and some of those cross-border initiatives have been hugely successful.
Thanks very much, Sinead. So we've got two Roman mics now, one on the right, one on the left. So if anybody else wants to contribute, either left or right. Yep, there we go. Fantastic.
So, Liam McCartney, I suppose from my perspective, I'm really interested. I think there's an elephant in the room in terms of everyone right across the panel. And I suppose that's about equality. And in terms of, I suppose, like health inequality, for a start, education inequality. And I suppose that's been touched right across the system. But right now, north, south, we're in a housing crisis, I suppose, in both jurisdictions. And in terms of health, the health service, north and south, there's long waiting lists, particularly for like adults, children with disabilities, access to respite care in terms of how carers are receiving support. And I suppose really that is poverty. Poverty is, you know, it is really the elephant in the room in terms of how we're going to address all that. So I suppose in terms of New Ireland, I'd be really interested in terms of the panel how we would address that. how we would address inequality right across the system in terms of economy, health, housing, and stuff like that. Just really to open the conversation. Thank you.
I think it's a brilliant question, a really brilliant question. It's a brilliant point. And I think, if I can give my contribution first, I think it's particularly on something I feel very strongly about. I think the answer I would give that is hopefully a simple one, which is do what works. And what works, as we have seen in very recent times, is go back to basics. We look at the Good Friday Agreement. There's a section in the Good Friday Agreement, rights, equality, safeguards, and sometimes it's forgotten about. It's not cited enough. And many people would have missed, because sometimes it's not as well reported as other things, but that exact provision in the Good Friday Agreement, rights, equality, safeguard, resulted in probably two of the most monumental changes in terms of the legal landscape in this jurisdiction in recent times. And they are the challenge to the amnesties for perpetrators regarding legacy. And the second one is in respect of the Illegal Migration Act and putting vulnerable people on planes to Rwanda. Most people don't appreciate it was actually the Good Friday Agreement. It was actually the underpinnings of the Good Friday Agreement that eroded both of those unlawful pieces of legislation. So I think that if it's not broke, don't fix it in that regard. Go back to what works. And what we need to do is underpin those protections in a stronger format. Because if we underpin them in a stronger format, we can see what it can be done when it's in the right place. And unfortunately, in both of those instances, there is also an elephant in the room, which is it was the British government who put that legislation there in the first place. But the reality is, when the rights protections are there and they're safeguarded in the right way, then you don't need to fear any legislator or other thing. So in my view, I think we go back to basics, we go back to what works, we take the principles of the Good Friday Agreement, the rights, equalities, the safeguards, the European Convention on Human Rights, and we enshrine them, we make sure that in a new constitution they're protected in the same way. Some people in this room were involved in the drafting of the Good Friday Agreement, and I think that they're not applauded enough because of the rights protections that are imposed, and I think that's what we need to do again in a new Ireland. What's your on your days,
From an economic perspective, I think this is probably the one area where we really don't want to just look to what they're doing in Ireland and follow along with it. It's hard because health and education and the economy all work together, and this is where poverty comes out of. And at the minute, as I said, the departments are fighting fire. We simply don't have enough money to deal with it. And then we're tied to the UK social security system, which I don't know what you say about it, to be honest. But it doesn't help. People, if you're in poverty, you need money in your pocket, and it's simple as that, to buy groceries or whatever. You don't need vouchers. You don't need somebody telling you that you need to go and get a job. And there was all this chat about the Labour government coming in and what that would look like, and it doesn't look like, I think, anybody who's interested in this space would have wanted it to. With work coaches, and we do that work with an activity, and work coaches and forcing people into work doesn't work. Cutting benefits doesn't get people to work. None of that works. It's the push factors is important. Are there good jobs there? Can people get to them? Things like that. If there was some flexibility built into the social security system that people could move in and out of work a bit easier, we have something like a quarter of those who are inactive is because of sickness or disability. And the large proportion of them people are not the same level of sick or unable to work all the time. It fluctuates, it moves, especially because a lot of it's coming from mental health. So the social security system is a huge part of that, and really it's just not the safety net that it was initially designed to be for people, especially when we consider cost of living and things. In the south, the DESH programs in the school has been a big factor in benefiting people, especially children in poverty. And we've seen, I suppose, the new programme from the Department of Education that was launched or published maybe last week or so, seems to be taking a similar approach, but they're using areas instead of schools. So in the south, where it is a very clear targeted message to schools in areas of need, or where the large majority of pupils are very much in need of support in terms of maybe not getting breakfast, but also if you're living in poverty, your educational outcomes and all the things, they're taking a real holistic approach to the schools that need it. But we're seeing now this programme that's come out now from the Department of Education is looking at areas. So the school I went to, Ballymena Academy, is one of the areas for extra support. And I think they're okay, to be honest. So I think it's just there's just not enough money at the minute. And then how we're interacting with what I suppose comes out of Westminster really is the crux of it for me. But there's change, there's much needed change in the south there too, in terms of poverty and children in poverty and children at risk of poverty. You know, there's still really high rates there, despite the very progressive tax system that they have, and despite the state of the economy, you know, being much better and in that surplus that you mentioned, Ian.
I'll just touch on the health inequalities and in healthcare in particular, and I'm going back to that whole saying again that health inequalities isn't just healthcare's responsibility. Tackling health inequalities is crucial, and I suppose when you look at the Sláinte Care and you look at our commission services within the north, health improvement and tackling inequalities is embedded throughout. But I suppose the services need fully resourced to do that, particularly within primary care. We need to get in early. We need early intervention programmes. We need more early intervention within our health service. We need to empower communities themselves. You think of our third sector, our community and voluntary sector, the work that they're doing is just crazy. It's just phenomenal. You can see the impact that it's having because they're actually there where people are. They're working within their communities. We need to support them, and I'm not sure if there's enough support going to our community and voluntary sector in terms of funding from the government. In fact, they've been hugely cut. Primary care definitely needs to be fully funded. The rollout of the MDT model needs to be fully funded and realised. That is a model that should have been implemented 2 or 3 years ago. I know we had COVID, but that will see the introduction of physios and social workers and mental health practitioners within your GP setting. So that needs hugely, there's an inequity of services at the minute because there's a partial rollout. So it depends where you live, whether you can access them services or not, and that's really not good enough. Every single person should be able to access those services, but yet again, there isn't enough money. So the tackling inequalities and that early intervention is key to making this a success. And, reading the Sláinte Care, that really is embedded because it's like an inclusion approach to the Sláinte Care, which is really welcome, but it's hugely important. I'm not sure if that's answered to the question, Blaine, but it's extremely important across all departments.
So we've obviously now heard healthcare is a major issue, equality is a major issue. Is there any other issues that people feel very strongly about? Let's go. Brilliant, this man here in the fourth row.
It's Michelle Conall O'Hamel. Like Ian, I had a background in Queen's University and teaching in the School of Nursing, and before that as a clinical nurse. And my question to the panel and what you're saying is, when I canvass for Sinn Féin, mostly around the Dungannon area, the 3 things that seem to be most prominent are housing, health and immigration. And it's that integration of those 3 areas which seems to be on people's minds. It's not really a constitutional question. They want to know if I'm ill, can I get access? This morning a colleague told me she made 32 phone calls at 8:30 in the morning to see a GP and couldn't get through. And eventually when she got through, they said they'd phone back. And of course when they phoned back, she missed the call. So now she has to phone at 8:30 tomorrow morning. The Oireachtas spent 1.3 million on a bike shed. I have no confidence, considering that they spent 350 million on a children's hospital, which isn't finished yet. So what confidence have the panel that these systems, the systems that Bengoa talked about putting systems in place that this would work? And several of you have mentioned, particularly Sinead, I'm delighted to hear these cross-border initiatives, but I have no confidence whatsoever that the money will be spent appropriately and not wasted like the Children's Hospital.
Yeah, and I suppose just going back to, when we talk about housing and how it affects people's health as well, we're talking about the social determinants of health. And again, that's everybody's business, and that's what we need to sort of look at when we're thinking of people's general health and well-being. In terms of access and services, we need to improve the access to services, all services within the health service. And I suppose the main thing that I would want to do is, not make it as complicated to access services at the minute. I think we overcomplicate the access to services, and it shouldn't be that complicated, just particularly within a primary care setting. And it needs to be equitable for people to access. There are things in motion in terms of primary care and GPs to improve access. It's just a slow burn, and the demand on their services is crazy. I'm not sure if there's many GPs coming into the field as well. So we have workforce issues there, and people going off to Australia and America and things like that. And I think that's something that we need to do more in terms of workforce planning.
I think it's a really brilliant point to put. And certainly I know, Liam, you have much more experience than I would have, but the two issues just jumped immediately out to me were health and immigration. We look at those two issues in particular. We look back and we see what happened with COVID. It's absolutely illogical at one point in time where we have two different approaches on a very small island like this. And in my view, that's the pin-up of why an all-island approach works, regardless. A very simple issue. The second one is immigration, because we've seen in very recent times politicians in the south blaming the north for the biggest catalyst for immigration in the south. Speaking firsthand from people who sees people coming from literally lorries, from the back of lorries to our office, I can tell you unequivocally the direction tends to be the other way. But it doesn't matter, because the answer is this. Again, it's illogical to have two different systems on just a small island. So I think when you look at those two issues, the answer is quite simple in my view. They are the obvious examples as to why an all-island approach would be better, because it's more logical. Turning to the next point, which I think, and again, Ian, you know much more about this than me, I mean, what we look at going forward, and having obviously been involved in the legislature in the south. But the point that I said at the start of this is, I don't think anybody came here tonight with the answer. I think this is the start of the road. This is the start of the conversation. These are the kind of issues that need to be grappled with. These are the kind of issues that need to be debated. These are the kind of issues that we need to hear from, so that we can all contribute, we can all give our opinions, and hopefully try collectively, as part of the People's Assembly, to bring forward what we see our solutions. I don't think anybody in this room proposes to have the solution, but I think particularly Ian, I'd be keen to hear what you say about that, given your previous experience.
Yeah, and I suppose it touches on that, on those couple of points that are made. Look, I work in the university. My best friend in the university is a Frenchman, Stefan. And Stefan moved from Toulouse to here 25 years ago, got married, and lives in this county. And it's interesting because his joke with me, he says, "You're turning into a bloody socialist." And I said, "No, I'm not." But because we have this argument about inequality and unfairness. And the reality is, what I do believe is social justice. And when we look at social justice, we see this phenomenon happening everywhere, where the divide and the chasm between the haves and the have-nots is getting wider and wider and wider. And I believe firmly in social justice, that everybody needs an opportunity and everybody should have a chance. But this isn't unique to Northern Ireland. This divide isn't unique because it's happening everywhere. When I look at the south, and I see it, and you're in Dublin, and you go one street from some of the wealthiest people on the island, and round the corner to the heroin addicts, and the homeless, and the people in tents, the migrants who haven't got a home, and you think to yourself, something's wrong. And as probably everybody in the room would know, when I went down there in 2018, it was probably the first time I read start to finish the proclamation, because, as you would know, it wasn't pinned up in our household. But the interesting take from that is, when you read it, I couldn't disagree with anything in it. And when I speak to Stefan about the French and the French attitude to looking after the citizens, it's interesting because even in French law they have things written where if the temperature drops for 5 consecutive days below a certain temperature, they've got to go out and bring the homeless people in and give them cover and give them shelter and look after them. It's about a declaration of caring for and looking after the people. And it's global, because it's happening everywhere. There's an election in the US coming up next week. You'll not see more inequality or unfairness than you will in there. The land of the free market, the world's biggest free economy, it's as bad there. So what can we do about it? And it's interesting because anybody who's in politics, and your comments are completely right about the political structures not being effective and not delivering. And I was going, you brought it up, but I was going to say, if you want to look at how you don't build a children's hospital, go there, because this is unbelievable. And every time you think the saga's over, all of a sudden there's another few $100 million, and it's another 2 or 3 years down the line. So it's not all sunshine there. But when you look at the politics and the failure of the politics, anybody that's in politics knows that it's simply the art of survival. And that's the reality. And unfortunately, our politics is about surviving from one election to the next election. And sometimes politicians are caught in saying things that make them popular and get them re-elected. I come from an industry where it's intergenerational. So the business plan in agriculture is always 10, 20, 30-year plan. You're always planning because you know you just won't close the door someday and drive off into the sunset. So with that political structure comes the reality that we need hard decisions. And that is really hard. And Daisy Hill was mentioned earlier. My younger brother's in Australia. If you're in Australia, he's on the East Coast. If you're in Australia and you have a hospital, a good hospital, within 2.5 hours, that's considered acceptable. That's what the norm is. If you have it within 2.5 hours, that's okay. We've become accustomed here to having lots of good services on our doorstep. The hard decisions, and Ben Goa highlighted that, was that there has to be some hard decisions made. For the politicians who are depending on popular support to get re-elected, that's really difficult because privately lots of them know what the solutions are, but implementing that is really difficult. When we look at the immigration thing, and immigration, interestingly, has never got to the level of tension that I've witnessed south of the border. But I think there's a big conflation here with the general public, and the media and press have a lot to answer for with how they've dealt with this and how they look at this. Because I speak to people, my father was in hospital 4 or 5 years ago and he was pretty ill, and I spoke to an individual, and the individual, and it was reprehensible what he said. He said, yeah, bloody, I'm not going to use the names he used. And I says, that's right, you're right, because you know what? There was a Nigerian doctor that's looking after my father and saving his life. There's Filipino nurses that are caring for him every day. I says, you're right, it's all the whatever. So there's a conflation that if somebody looks different to us, they must be an immigrant, they must be a migrant. I have 2 brothers, one who lives in Scotland and one who lives in Australia. They're migrants. Might not like it, but they're migrants. I have a family who are migrants. I did a meeting with Leo Varadkar in the Shared Island thing one time a couple of years ago, and I was doing a bit of background research and working out sort of the numbers around it. And the thing that I didn't realise is that there's 6.5 million people in the UK that are Irish and of Irish descent. They're effectively migrants. So there's more Irish in England than there is in Ireland, which is a pretty bizarre concept. I did a meeting in Birmingham with a businessman who spoke with a strong Irish brogue. And I says, oh, you're Irish? He goes, aye, came 40 years ago over. I says, where'd you come from? He says, Tipperary. I says, right, good time. Yeah, he says, look, England's been great. I've brought up my family. I've done very well in business, but I'm moving back home. I says, you're moving home? Where are you going to? Back to Tip. I says, what's your thinking? Migrants. This place is full of migrants. He couldn't see the irony that he was a migrant.
I think we have a contribution down the... Oh, sorry. We have a couple coming on this side now. So we have 2 here and then we have one down the back. So,
Sorry, Carl Hughes from Uri. I just want to make one comment just directly to Ian and to Sinead. You've both taken occasion tonight to mention Daisy Hill Hospital and hold it up perhaps as an example of what's failing in our healthcare system in the north. I, along with a coalition of political representatives that are cross-party, business leaders and community leaders in and around Uri, work day and daily very diligently to understand the problems that Daisy Hill Hospital encounters on a daily basis, but it's also reflective of the problems encountered right across the healthcare system in the north. And, you know, we've become a bit jaded down our part of the world by Daisy Hill constantly being singled out as an example of what's wrong with the healthcare system in the north. Daisy Hill Hospital is a victim of what's wrong with the healthcare system. It's not symptomatic or driving what's wrong with the healthcare system in the north. It's a fractured, broken system on the verge of collapse. We met recently with the Health Minister, Mike Nesbitt, who told us directly to our face that he may well be from a different political persuasion than most of the people who were in the room at that meeting, but he has absolutely no aversion to all-island healthcare. So I think we need to get busy and we need to get real about what that actually means and looks like. Because if you want to drive all-island nationhood, you want to drive all island economy, all island society. I think the one linchpin to all of that is healthcare. And if we get healthcare right for all our people, irrespective of what your own political persuasion may be, whatever your own allegiance may be, I think that we begin the journey then to move to a mature conversation about what all-islandism looks like. But until we get healthcare right, and until we stop beating up the victims in this situation, and those that are on the sharp end of political decision-making and central, how do you describe it, central government decision-making that has gone wrong for a long time. I think that, we're not really going to move this argument forward. We're hemorrhaging our young people who are qualifying as doctors. We're letting them walk out of this country on the planes with incentives of £10,000 to relocate to Australia and everywhere else. How do we propose to fix that? We need to change the legislation. We need to find a new way to hold on to those people and grow our own workforce. And if that means, that we look at financial incentives to keep them here, and then we get them to sign contracts to stay for the first 5 years of their professional career. But we need to do something. Otherwise, we're really on the verge of collapse. Thanks for your time.
I think there's a man behind as well, please.
Chris Swain. I'm from Moira, part of which is in County Armagh, another part's in Down, another part's in Antrim. I live in the Armagh part. We've talked about what I would call the macro issues, the big issues, the economy, the health care system, education, rights, which are very important. All these topics are very important. But I think when the day comes where we're faced with the choice of yay or nay to constitutional change in the new Ireland, we won't individually be swayed by these very big issues. It'll be how this change will affect our personal lives. And I've a few examples which I've sort of considered, and a couple of them have been raised at these events in the past. And I'll make it clear, I don't have a personalised or cherished number plate on my car. But for those people who do have a cherished number plate, who have maybe spent £15,000 or £20,000 on a number plate for their wife's car, that will be an issue if they don't know going into the ballot box what will happen to that cherished number plate. On perhaps a more realistic or topic, or where we would have more empathy, a Motability user who has a Motability car, if they don't know what's going to happen to their Motability scheme going into the future, there's a saying that in a referendum, if you don't know, vote no. And another one, I don't have a Motability car, and I don't have a dog either, but I believe, and I can be corrected if I'm wrong in saying this, that the Dangerous Dog Act in the south is different from the legislation in the north. And what that would mean is that for someone who owns a German Shepherd, or a Doberman, or a Rottweiler, or even a little staffy Bull Terrier, if constitutional change came about and we standardise with the South, the little staffy Bull Terrier would have to be walked muzzled and on a lead if we're to move in the same direction as the South. So I think it's those little issues that are very important. And I suppose I would ask the panel, how do we, I suppose, explore those and find out what all those little issues are? And what shape could a new Ireland be that would, I suppose, gradually change towards a standardization? Like Ian, I'm from a I'm not going to say unionist background. I have a British identity, which I'm immensely proud of. I have a passionate Irish identity. Both those identities, neither one eclipses or diminishes the other. And I believe that my life, like your life, is the richer for them both. And I remember talking to a very prominent Republican who talked about Irish unity being a process and not an event. So what process and what shape of a new Ireland does the panel see that can transition over a period of time to deal with things like mobility cars, number plates, and Staffy Bull Terriers?
I'm definitely not going to answer them three things. But from an overall perspective, and this is at the events I've spoke at previously, you know, talking about the constitutional question, and my boss has done some too. I think we need to learn from Brexit, and it's been mentioned before, in terms of what this is going to look like logistically, how it works, and about a sort of phasing in. You know, we'd maybe talk about poverty and about things like social security just changing to Irish rates overnight. Things like that just aren't going to be feasible at all. And I think it's about really looking at a long term. You know, we talk a lot about when this border poll is going to be, but even after that, should a border poll be ratified, looking at how that sort of phasing in is after that, and it's definitely a long term process. It's not a case of a vote on Friday and the Dangerous Dog Act changing on Saturday when you go to the park. But, you know, and we would talk a lot about the subvention and different things like that, and let's not get into the subvention tonight. I think we've all had quite enough of that one, but it really is taking that long-term approach and how this is going to change, about what this new Ireland is going to look like across a whole range of areas. And there's a lot of work to be done there. You know, us sitting in Armagh or wherever it may be, there's a whole lot of people and organisations and politicians need to be involved in them discussions, and they need to be happening.
Yeah, concur with everything Anne says, and it is a process, and it's a process that needs to be managed. It's not something that you can just bumble through, but it's about dialogue and it's about engagement. As I said earlier, I spent my time trying to unite people, and when I first went to Leinster House, I was told it's not a good place, it's a cold house for unionists, you'll not be welcome there. There'd been no joy there. Turned out to be completely the opposite. It was very welcoming. I mixed and got very friendly and have made lifelong friends with people who are diametrically opposed to me politically, because it's about the humanity, it's about the engagement. We have a job of work to build relationships across this island, because sometimes this unity conversation is coached a bit as, well, those funny people in the north need to work out their differences. When I was there, I had Judith Thompson down. Judith Thompson was a victims commissioner, and there was a conversation we're having about legacy. And what I realised very quickly in the conversations in Leinster House was that Northern Ireland actually had, for a big part, dealt with legacy issues, because we had a mandatory coalition. We had people working in local councils together, working on bodies and organisations and businesses together, sitting in an executive together. And when I looked at the legacy issues, there were more legacy problems in Dublin than I thought we had in Belfast, because all I heard about was the Civil War parties. And not well, I'm going to pick out people. Some people in the establishment hated Sinn Féin more than the DUP hated Sinn Féin in the north. So this notion that legacy was a Northern Ireland thing, that those crazy Nordies need to deal with it. So it's a process of engagement. It is a process of setting out a safe space, and somebody mentioned it, a safe space to have a very open and frank and fair conversation. Citizens' assemblies have been mentioned. I was on the Oireachtas Committee for Climate Change and Environment, and they commissioned a citizens' assembly to do a report on what the future would look like for the Irish economy as regards decarbonisation and climate change. And it was really interesting because they brought in this big weighty document generated by the Citizens' Assembly, and it made me really nervous, because what they identified in it were two factors that were going to have to be tackled: transportation We'd have to do something about too many diesel engines and too many cars and vehicles on the roads, and agriculture. Now, what that said to me was there was a risk with citizens' assemblies, because in the absence of looking at the entire picture, because the Irish government could change that tomorrow morning. They push duties up on fuel, they push road tax up, they'll take you off the road, but you'll not be able to drive your car to work, you'll not be able to afford food in the shops because it'll be so expensive. Or they could legislate against farmers, reduce the herd by 50%, food will get double the price. Is that what everybody wants? No. So the politicians have mechanisms to do this, the legislators could do it, but that's not realistic. So when you look at the process, the Citizens' Assembly is really important. But what I always say about the Citizens' Assembly, there's a responsibility for government to set the framework out. They have to create a framework and a mechanism to have the conversation in, because, and it's well documented, some of the researchers and academics have done a bit of work on this. If you cast your net out and you select 100 people at random to come and join a Citizens' Assembly, some of those people won't want to go, some of those people will choose not to participate. This notion that you get a fair representation of society in those 100 people is actually flawed. So I think what you need to do is Citizen Assembly and engaging with groups and organisations and the ordinary man and woman in the street is really important. But it must be done within a framework where it's set out and it's directed and it's constructed and it's organised. And I know it's really contentious what you just said about a confirmation referendum, but I actually think there's a logic in doing the first part and then having a formalised process of negotiation and dialogue so that you'll have an idea of what it would look like the other side of a second confirmation vote. And for anybody who believes in unity and believes passionately with their heart that it'll be better in a united Ireland, then you should have nothing to fear in that. Because here's the rub. Anybody from a unionist background who can see a future where their children will be healthier, wealthier and better off might vote for unity.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Citizens' Assembly as well, and I suppose we're going back to the title of this evening and do what it says on the tin, have your say. So we need to ensure that people have their say, and how we do that. I suppose the Citizen Assembly, it might not just look like a group of people in a room. There could be different ways and methods of gathering that information. As Ian was saying, meaningful engagement could look different for different groups, could look different to you, to me. How do we engage people and go to where people are? Go to those communities and have the local citizens' assemblies, gather the feedback. And people then will actually dictate what's going to happen with all those areas that you pointed out. And that's the only way it's ever going to happen. I suppose the practicalities of that, if people can sort of help to plan that, you're guaranteed that it'll probably work if it's people that are having their say on how it looks. But I suppose it's just having those spaces to be transparent and have people feel safe to actually speak their mind, I suppose.
I think we've only got time for maybe one or two more questions. I know there's a lady in the third row who's been waiting some time. So,
Hi, Lucy Moyer. I'm a recently qualified teacher. My question to the panel is, whenever I speak to my newly qualified cohort, I'd say half of them, if not more, have all got jobs elsewhere out of Ireland. So my question to you is, how do we encourage and keep our young people in this country so they can flourish here with the country? And I think the sad reality for me, whenever I ask, my friends that are recently qualified, recent graduates, why are you leaving? For me, I love my country and I want to stay here very much so. When I asked one of my friends, why are you leaving? She said, there's nothing worth to stay. So how can we change that narrative and promote our young people to stay here and to benefit with the country?
Oh, this has got you written all over it.
I don't know. You could talk about all the economic policies in the world, but if that's why they're leaving, I think that's a bigger question, and I think it does feed into what do we want this place to look like, whether that's Northern Ireland, the north of Ireland, a subsumed Ireland, any New Ireland. You know, what do we as people want it to look like? Honestly, I really don't know the answer. I think it's very difficult. It's actually something that I would love to be able to research, but there's no magical data set out there yet for. But I think it's really interesting. And going to the school I went to, loads of my friends left and went to England. In saying that, now we talk about this brain drain, and I call it the so-called brain drain. I think there's certain professions it's worse in, medicine and teaching. Clearly, you know, we've so many going to the Middle East and Australia and things. In terms of the overall brain drain, we don't actually have one. So we have something like 25% of people going to England for uni, and we compare that to people leaving England. If you compare the regions within England, we actually have something like the lowest proportion of people leave. You know, there's a lot of movement from the northeast and the northwest to London and vice versa. So I think when you look at it that way, obviously Scotland, it's really low, but that's because of the way the education system is set up there, and it's always going to be the case. So I think it's not the brain drain in and of itself, but them specific professions, there is definitely something needs done. I did speak to somebody, no, I'll not name them, very senior within teacher training, I suppose, or teacher education. And I said, but there's too many teaching graduates. You know, is that the case? Is there just too many, and should we limit the numbers? And they said, but because of the way the profession is in terms of sub-teaching and cover, you always need a surplus of teachers coming out, and then they're coming out and they don't have a permanent job, and they're getting these offers, and they're coming into career days and into the universities. So, I don't know. Sorry, it's very complicated.
Flowing from that, I think we've touched upon probably the final question tonight. Sinead and Ian could come in, which is, how does the future unfold from here? What does the future look like?
Well, I hope my future looks like my son comes home from Australia at some stage too. I have a son in Australia, and I do hope to God that he comes home to roost at some stage. His plans, though, are that it's not for a year, and I think that's where we're seeing the difference when people, you know, it's not for a year, whereas they would have went for a year and come home. They seem to be wanting to stay longer. They're looking for sponsorship. It's a 5-year plan, longer. But in terms of the future, I have hope. I suppose we have to have hope. I have great hope. I think we can do magical things in this island. I think we're already doing magical and really fantastic things, but we can do more. And we have to, again, involve people to come up with the solutions and how, if a new constitution, what that would look like. So I feel very hopeful. I'll just leave it like that.
Yeah, I share Sinead's optimism, definitely. This is a glass half full, there's no question. Take a look at the journey we've been on. Take a look at what we have now. It's interesting you mentioned about, you know, people leaving and all, because I think we're not unique in this, and you pointed out the stats on it, Anne, because here's the reality. When I was 20 years old, 2.5 times your salary would buy you a house. We're 7-8 times at least our salary to do that. I think you need to look at the root causes of why on earth people are leaving. But the really interesting thing is, for anybody that travels much, when you go away and you live somewhere else and you come back, you think, you know what, it's a grand wee place, and it's not as bad as sometimes we think it is. So I'm really hopeful. We have a temperate climate, and beyond no illusion, a temperate climate's going to be important for everybody who's young in the room, not maybe for me, because they keep telling me in work that we're looking at the 2050 targets on climate change. I'm 83 in 2050. It ain't going to matter much to me. But for the young people, with a temperate climate, we have skilled workforce. We have a good, despite its flaws and its problems, we have skill set and a good education system with really good people. And you know what? This conversation tonight can be replicated other places. And I see within a university now where a lad can sit down, or a girl, with a Glasgow Rangers top on them and an Armagh GAA top on them, and they don't actually care. So for me, the opportunities are immense. The interesting thing is Northern Ireland is so small and so well connected. I was part of an organisation that was set up, and we brought together 3 organisations in the province to deal with a problem. And when I was in London, the English thought, oh, that's a really good idea, we'd like to replicate that. So they replicated the model. They had 61 organisations sitting at the table. So we have a brilliant opportunity. We've got good people, and future's bright.
On that note, if I could just maybe express my thanks to all the panelists. I'm sure everybody would agree that it was an expert contribution. If I could just ask you all to show your deep appreciation. I think equally the thanks is reciprocal. Thank you to all of your contributions, the personal and professional. They were superb from all ends, and I thought it was informative, to say the least. I think we should thank Sinn Féin for organising this. These are the kind of conversations we all agree on should be happening all across this island. This is only the start of the journey. This is only one step on the road. We all believe, we all feel very strongly, I think, when we say, I think I say, speak for everybody, this is only the beginning. This is a good start, but a good start is only half the battle. There's a famous line, many ships sink when the harbour is in sight. We can't get complacent. This is only the start of the journey. And I think Sinead summed it up best. It's what it says on the tin. It's people's assembly. It's people getting their say. That's what's important, including people in the conversation. That's how we move forward. Go back to basic principles of the Good Friday Agreement. The will of the people, that's what matters. And I'm going to quote to finish the night from a very famous Republican. If I misquote him, I apologise. But the line would go something like, everyone, Republican or otherwise, has their part to play. No part is too big, no part is too small. You're not too old, you're not too young to play your part. And I think that's the message we should finish on. We all have a part to play. We all have a part to play in including everybody in this conversation in the weeks, months, years ahead. Thank you for your attention.